Welcome to the Brothers and Sisters podcast. This is what's coming up next, so stay tuned.
The problem with COVID is because it happened during Donald Trump. He lied. No, I'm dead ass. No, I'm dead ass. He lied. His group of people believed him. And because he continued to lie and didn't tell people how serious it was, they took it willy-nilly.
You see, he got booed. He was like, get the vaccine. They were like, fuck that. Like, boo.
Conversely, if Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton was president at the time, and they said, listen, this shit's serious, you're going to fucking die if you get it, guess what people will fucking do?
Yeah.
They're going to believe the source, and they're going to wear a mask. I mean, it's just what's going to happen. It's do people follow a good leader? You know what I mean? Or do they not?
Our final topic is the FDA approval of the Pfizer vaccine. We've got a licensed doctor on the pod to get us to try to shed some insight on what the hell people are thinking when it comes to this, because I don't know. Like I said, we've got people just making up facts. People want to fight.
Yeah.
I don't get it. So we now know the Pfizer vaccine completely FDA approved. Literally as a result of that, a lot of private businesses, a lot of organizations are mandating vaccines now, which I'm sure for everybody on this pod just makes sense. Is probably 1 + 1 = 2 kind of sense. But I guess next week he's a little bit squeamish on masks. Of course, he's an MD. We got people who are calling it dictatorship and fascism to mandate vaccines, even though we mandate all sorts of shots for all sorts of things. I remember for those of us, we're all around the same age. When we were in college, going to college, it was meningitis, right? Had to have a meningitis shot before you couldn't set foot on campus. What are we going to do? I've been reading things that you can't shame the unvaccinated. That's like not the way to go. Although like every bone in my body just wants to shame unvaccinated people, but that's a lot of Black people. I'm not trying to shame Black people. What the fuck? Like anybody, I'm thoroughly confused. I don't know what to do.
I'm shaming anybody. I don't care. No discrimination. You don't get a vaccine, that's your fault.
Yeah.
I mean, as somebody who sees it up close and personal, because my wife works in the hospital, how dumb can you be? Like, it's dumb. Like you have to be willfully ignorant to not take the vaccine.
I'm sharing articles, Black doctors, Black nurses imploring Black people to get the vaccine.
I mean, it was literally at the beginning, the white folks were trying to pay their doctors to skip the line.
Yeah.
What more do you need to know?
Yeah. Doc, what are people thinking?
98% of the people are going to survive. But how are they going to survive? Will they still get sense of taste? Can they still smell? Or is in the hospital for a year after the fact? I mean, these are things that happen.
Help us, Doc. What are people thinking?
I think first of all, there's been a lot of politicization of COVID, and that really corrupted the waters, right? Where it became a political statement to have it or to not have a mask, or to have or not have the shot. And so we were already sort of entrenched in these political ideologies and stances already. And this has just become one of the ways that people are kind of waving their flags for whatever side they land on. So that's one of the things I think that's making it hard to get people to sort of see reason and to see why wearing a mask actually makes the most sense and why getting the shot makes the most sense, because it's been tied up now in their political ideology. So that's one thing. I think the second thing is that there's a healthy distrust, right, of the medical system, because there's history there of people of color being abused and taken advantage of in it. However, you add the misinformation that comes to social media, you have misinformation that comes with people not really understanding how things are done or how the vaccines were developed. And so they're kind of going off of what sounds right or whatever their friend has reposted on Facebook or whatever their group has kind of said to each other. So then that feels, because just because it sounds like it's true doesn't exactly make it true, but whatever sounds sort of like good, your brain will make those connections and the conspiracy theories will kind of be abounding, help to add the fodder to people being skeptical of it. So you have legitimate and I think, reasonable, healthy mistrust of science and of the medical system because of the history that's there. But I think that would be over one if there was some accuracy of information getting in. And I think because of the misinformation and the fake news that's been thrown around and targeted to certain communities, it makes it even harder for them to operate on truth. And
so is Walter right? We got to shame people?
I don't know. I don't believe that shaming necessarily works, right? Because if you think about it, if I were to shame you for anything, you probably would resent me more so than come over to my side and my way of thinking. And if you did come over to my side of thinking, it wouldn't be because I shamed you, it's because maybe there's some other benefit that you see in it. But most of the time, shame makes us defensive and it makes us want to protect ourselves, and then we attack. And secondly, if you think about anyone who's been in a cult, the more facts you show them, the more entrenched they get into the cult, because they're just going to spin that theory to make sense. Because if you've ever made a bad purchase, if you ever made a bad purchase or made a bad choice when you had two options,
yeah,
when you realize you've made the bad choice, you're rarely going to say, yeah, that was a bad choice. You're going to be like, no, actually, it was the better choice because at the time I thought we were going to rationalize why.
The principle being conned, right? Like when
exactly.
you get conned, like
because
you get
it's way too threatening to your psyche to say, yeah, I kind of went into that the wrong way and I was completely incorrect in that. There's the instinct is to sort of like make sense of it and to turn it around. So if someone's caught up in a cult, you showing them all the reasons why they're in a cult isn't going to make them get out of the cult. It actually is going to make them get even more entrenched in that cult and more committed to the person who's messing with their head. Same with the vaccines. If they're already committed to this narrative that the vaccine's bad, you coming at them with all the facts isn't going to convince them. They'll just come at you with their own facts and kind of feel like they're right. So one of the ways that I find that's helpful is just ask a lot of questions. So one of the things, and make them do the work. So rather than you needing to convince them, let them kind of sit with cognitive dissonance, where they have to sit with these two truths that they have to decide, am I going to keep one or throw one away, which is which? So I would say to somebody who doesn't want to get the vaccine, who doesn't trust it, I would say, how much do you trust COVID? Because we don't know what's going to happen to your body if you have it. You have no clue what's going to happen to you. At least with the vaccine, there's some research and we can kind of point to something that's there. We have no idea what COVID is going to do to you in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. So either way, you're making a risk, what determines where you're going to make that gamble and that risk. So that might be a question that you bring to them. You might say, if you do get COVID and it happens for you to be a bad case, you go to the hospital, would you go to the hospital? And B, would you want them to treat you? And what would you want them to treat you with? Because if you go to the hospital, then that implies you're going to trust science at some point, which you're saying you don't trust now. If you go to the hospital and you say that you want them to treat you, then we don't have a cure for COVID. So it's all experimental drugs at that point. So do you want them to experiment on you before COVID or while you have it? Because either way, you're making a risk and a calculation. So I would just ask some questions to kind of let them think through their decision a little bit more. Wherever they land, at least it's an informed decision at that point, and it's not one that's made on a reaction or out of defensiveness or anger even.
There's a lot of anger. I don't know if you guys have noticed that. Like, there's a lot of, like, people are really dedicated to not wearing a mask, not getting vaccinated. The guy who wanted to fight me was like, he's too busy dodging bullets in the streets. He's not worried about COVID. I didn't have really a response for that. And I was like, oh, I mean, it sounds like you do have bigger problems than COVID, but you should still get vaccinated nonetheless.
But that argument also implies that the two things can't happen at once. Why can't you get shot at and have COVID? Like, it's not it's not a binary. Like, those two things can exist, right? So you may not be able to stop the shooting, but you could stop the COVID piece. So maybe you can get the vaccine while you're dodging, right?
I think he viewed it as a priority thing. He prioritized his freedom and his liberty over, a mandatory vaccination, as he liked to put it.
It's like you when could it comes actually die from both. At least one can be prevented, or at least one make it less likely that you're gonna die. Yeah.
I mean, I think we all know where we stand. But part of it is I'm not sure if the people we need to convince would even listen to this type of podcast, or if they would, like, it would be in a YouTube comment and it wouldn't be something nice that they would respond with. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I mean, Autumn's in Florida, Doc is in Florida. Like, we're at a place now where, like, it's worse than what it was before. So I'm not sure, to Walter's point, like, it's pretty willfully ignorant now. Like, we've seen this cycle before and we're still here. And that's why I brought up the shaming. Like, what else can be done? And I'm not, that's where I was. Walter made his point clear. Like, I know a bunch of people who would be considered, progressive, liberal, about people who are like, yeah, we got to shame people now. Yeah. Like, people are rooting for corporations to be like, we're going to take away your privileges if you don't get vaccinated, if you don't wear a mask.
Well, I think that's different from shaming. I think that's just consequences, right? Like, you can give consequence and hold people accountable without shaming them. So I could say, you don't have to wear your mask, you just can't come to my store. That's not me holding up a sign saying you're a terrible human being. I'm just merely telling you what the boundary is if you're going to engage with me.
It's we're talking about
that's the hard part, right? That's the hard part, because now we're asking a $15 an hour person to deal with someone yelling and cussing at them, right? Yeah. And I mean, I literally just saw this happen. This guy comes into a sunglass shop, and it is a small woman in there working, and he's coming, and she says, "Sir, can you please leave and put, or put on a mask?" "I'm not putting on a mask." She says, "Sir," and he starts knocking the shit off the shelves. Yeah. She calls security. The security is a big dude with a big gun, and you got to get out of here, man. Yeah. Okay. It was hilarious, his reaction, but it's unfair to the people who are doing their job, right? So
yeah, the people who make the rules need to be the people who are enforcing them, not just pushing it off on some, like. But I understand that, because the people who aren't making as much money are going to have to deal with the consequences.
You can't say they're pushing it off on them, because that's the job, right? Your job is the store policy. If someone walks in the store with no shirt on, you're going to tell them to turn their ass around and go put on a shirt.
Well, yeah, but if I'm making not a lot of money, I'm going to be like, you don't pay me enough to jeopardize myself with customers. So
that's where I would be, Autumn.
I'm not going to do it. Whatever, fire me if you have to, and then find somebody else. But yeah, but I understand I do agree that the rules, there's a benefit to enforcing the rules. But like, back to what you said, Doc. It's people are establishing a boundary. Human beings hate boundaries. Like, boundaries, as soon as you establish some sort of boundary, even if it's the most reasonable one, if it's a boundary a person has never come up against before, they're
try to,
on their personality, they're going to throw a tantrum.
And I think people hate boundaries in theory, right? Because if we think about this, if you can drive and I can drive, why do we have stupid lines in the road telling us where we can't be? Right? Like, if you want to go diagonally, you should be able to do that. That's your freedom. And I should be able to, like, stop whenever I want to. That's my freedom, or not stop if I want to. But we realize that creates chaos. And so those boundaries of those lines and those traffic lights and those stop signs actually allows us to enjoy those freedoms, because now that I know what my lane is, I can go sailing in it. And if you cut across, I honk you because you have now violated a boundary. You're not supposed to do that. If you've ran the red light, you violated a boundary. You're not supposed to do that, because that allows me to drive freely and not worry every 2 seconds that someone's going to come sideways and hit my car. So in theory, we are like, oh, boundaries make everything terrible. But in practice, they allow the freedom that we're wanting to actually occur. Without those boundaries, we'll never truly experience any kind of freedom, because you never get comfortable enough to relax and to enjoy anything.
I think the issue is with what you guys are talking about is the universal recognition, right? Of
COVID, the problem with COVID is because it happened during Donald Trump. He lied. No, I'm dead ass. No, I'm dead ass. He lied. His group of people believed him. And because he continued to lie and didn't tell people how serious it was, it took it willy-nilly.
You see, he got booed. He got booed. He was like, get the vaccine. They were like, fuck that. Like, boo.
Conversely, if Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton was president at the time, and they said, listen, this shit's serious, you're gonna fucking die if you get it, guess what people will fucking do?
Yeah.
They're gonna believe the source and they're gonna wear a mask. I mean, it's just what's gonna happen. It's do people follow a good leader? You know what I mean? Or do they not? And that's what caused the situation to be what it is now.
What can we do for Black people with this? Because we're lagging.
And we're lacking because of a bunch of information that's like a Venn diagram, right? It's like a whole bunch of shit that are individually by themselves are accurate. The Tuskegee experiment happened, right? But we were not given syphilis. We were just not giving the treatment for syphilis.
Yeah.
People think that we were given syphilis in place of something else. So it's the mistrust of the government. It's 400 years of economic, social oppression, right? And then old wives' tales. Well, you heard about Willie Bobo. It happened to him. I don't want it to happen to me.
They're saying Hank Aaron died because of a vaccination. I was like,
you know what I'm saying? It's all the things that are facts, but they're not facts that are in the fact pattern that we're talking about. So it's important that when we're leveling with people, it's like, yo, these people are dead because of COVID. It's hitting
us worse.
And so I'm throwing in my health pitch now. Here's the health pitch. Black people in America are 60% overweight. 60% of us are at least 30% overweight. 60%. That's a tremendous number. Here's the number we don't hear about from COVID. 78% that are in the hospital or dead were at least 30% overweight.
Yeah.
So think about that. As a Black man in the health profession, I need to get us as healthy as we can so we can live. But we don't talk about that. Why? Because our eating habits suck. Right? We don't take care of ourselves. We don't drink enough water. We fucking climb on milk crates. I mean, we've been doing dumb shit.
But then you also you again, because nothing happens in a vacuum, right? You also have to connect that with like social determinants of health and the fact that there are food deserts and and the cost of healthy foods in poor neighborhoods is higher than you would find in more wealthy neighborhoods. You also find that they will put in 50, McDonald's, right? And fast food restaurants before they would put in a super healthy grocery that provides produce and all those things. So there's a lot of factors that contribute to why we're eating what they're eating. It doesn't take away responsibility to be on top of their own eating habits, but I think we have to consider all the factors that make that reality.
Education, which I agree with, right? Because I think Michelle Obama was right. You give kids only good choices to make when they become adults to make better choices on their plate. So that's all.
We talked about that was one of our first
podcasts, right? Yeah. So I totally agree with you 1,000,000%. But trying to pull back in the quality, dude, shame the fuck out of them. Make them feel bad.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard things about different bathrooms. I'm hearing things about like sectioning off places on public transportation. Like literal, like
at Delta Airlines, if you are not vaccinated, they're gonna charge you, the employee, $200 a month for your employee screening once a week.
Yeah.
I'm for it.
Yeah. Me, you were gonna say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say I think now the onus is on those that aren't vaccinated, because at this point it is choice. And all of us before made the collective choice and decision to like stay home, shelter in place. Coming from California, when we were the first to go into lockdown and we were the guinea pigs of it all, it was scary in the sense that like we were the first ones that got hit with it and we didn't know what was going to happen, and it did feel like it was the apocalypse. And so when you're in that pressure cooker, and you do make that conscious choice, and then you come out of it almost a year later. Like California just came out of the initial COVID shutdown as of June 15th. So while the rest of the country was open, California just came out as a state as of June 15th of this year. So it does kind of feel like, other people need to feel the pain point. And if you're making the conscious choice to be out and about, I don't necessarily know if shaming is the right way, but there does need to be like some sort of like punitive response to it, be it fines, be it you can't go inside of a business, be it, there does need to be like some sort of personal
Accountability.
pain point that needs to go onto it, so that people then at that point have to make that choice. I don't want to call them friends, but I have associates that at this point are making a conscious choice not to get the vaccine, and not because they think that there's anything wrong with it. Their beliefs align a certain way, and they are going to toe that line regardless of what facts they read on the internet that dispel that there's nothing wrong with the vaccine. They're just not going to get it. And they've had several close run-ins. They know people all around them that have had COVID, and they're just not going to get it because they just don't want to get the vaccine. It's a badge for them. It's a badge of honor to say that they don't have the vaccine and they're not going to get it. So at this point, there's nothing that any of us that are vaccinated can say to people that are in that bubble. They're just not going to do it. So this is, in my opinion, it's just going to have to be the new way of life for them.
I wrote about that hardened stance. Doc, how has COVID affected your practice? Or actually, this is a two-part question. How do you separate your practice from race positive? And then how has COVID affected one or both?
A good question. So I have my race positive sort of encapsulates my private practice work. So it's a consulting company, and there's like an end of it that has therapeutic support. So that's sort of like a 2-in-1 there. And then I have like a separate job over here where I kind of oversee a bunch of clinicians and supervisors and all that. So those two things are very separated in that respect. But the therapeutic piece that I do privately is incorporated into race positive. But the mission about race positive is to get people to talk about race. The therapy piece is acknowledging the fact that how that shows up in your life can have serious impact on your mental health. And so let's create a space to talk about that in a more, deliberate, nuanced way than we can get in a big room with a bunch of people with me giving a presentation or a workshop of some kind. So that's so kind of like two sides of the same coin in that respect. As for how it's affected things, the upside with COVID is that people really, I think, got to understand the importance of mental health. And I think there's been, shifting this kind of like mental health is having its moment a little bit where everyone's kind of like, mental health positive and supportive. And there are a lot of spaces that are coming up for people to pursue it and to get treatment and to get support. So that's a good thing. I think having accessibility via online work is also really good. Prior to it, I'd never done any sort of teletherapy. It had all been in person. And the concept of teletherapy was sort of foreign and not something I was on board with. And then COVID happened and it was all I was able to do. And all of a sudden it felt quite natural and something that was super helpful and beneficial. Like anything, not everybody is appropriate for telehealth therapy, right? Some people you do absolutely need to see them in person. For some people, they just can't connect with you virtually. It's just not how it works. And so it's really about figuring out who's right for which modem and then kind of sticking with it as their needs kind of go. But I personally have really liked doing virtual work, and my private practice is all virtual. So any new clients that I take on, I see them virtually, and that works pretty well for me and for them. But again, I'm very mindful that not everyone is the right person for that modem. So if that is the case, I would say to somebody, I think you would actually be better with a person who can see you in person. And I would recommend that you go work with that person and not with me, because I don't have that capacity at this moment.
Okay. When we talk about, I guess, what caused you to start Race Positive, and how can I frame this? Is it within the same realm? Is it different? Is it a derivative of, or maybe it was a parent of anti-racism workshops that are in vogue now with Robin DiAngelo and the rise of Ibram X. Kendi. Were you thinking about that? Because I know it seems like that's kind of, in vogue now also, both controversial and for somebody who, is all about those things, or like happy that they exist. Where did you come in there, and what do you think about really one or both?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for me, I really shied away from talking about race because I didn't want to be the Black girl talking about race, because I was like, that's all, we kind of get labeled as, and I definitely wanted to stay away from that. And then it came to a point where I realized that as much as I didn't want to talk about it, it still was affecting my life and affecting the people around me. And therefore, if I'm going to talk about it, at least let's talk about it right. And being a psychologist, I really learned to listen, right? You listen to how people talk to each other, how they communicate. And I found that it's a little bit like couples therapy, where they're both talking, but they're not having the same conversation. They're talking past each other. And I would find that people will go into conversations about race. If you just ever monitor a Facebook chat where someone is kind of getting into a fight on Facebook around a race topic, you'll kind of see this dynamic happen where someone will kind of, point out a behavior that was a problem. And then the person will respond by pointing out like a character issue. So they'll say, oh, you said this thing that was upsetting to me. Are you saying that I'm a racist? I help all these poor Black people every day. You can't tell me my boyfriend's Black and he's awesome. And I have Black adopted kids. You don't know anything about my life. It becomes a character issue when the conversation was about the behavior. And so we're now talking past each other and not about the issue at hand. That was one piece of it. And then secondly, it was a thought about how the conversations around race felt so negative, like no one ever wanted to do it. They were so important to be had, but they were just terrible, right? And if you're in something that doesn't make you want to be there, then you're not listening. You're really not going to get anything out of it. It feels like just something to check off of a list, and we're not really moving anything forward. It just becomes circular and angry. And so I really wanted to step into that space and say, well, can we set better ground rules so that way it's more engaging and perhaps more positive? And can we actually talk about the issue at hand and not get sideways and go off into these red herrings that detract from the point of the conversation? And by positive, I want to say, I don't mean kumbaya, everyone's lovely and let's just all bleed red and we're good. It's not that sort of positivity. It's positivity in the sense that I believe that you have inherent God-given value, and I cannot lose sight of that in this conversation. Right? Like that is not up for debate. I can be straightforward and honest with you without having to sacrifice your humanity in order to do that. And that's what we mean by positivity. So it's not this, don't talk about anything hard and make people uncomfortable. It's race. You're going to feel uncomfortable and it's going to be hard, but we can do that in a manner that's respectful. We can do that in a manner that actually keeps us focused on the issue at hand. It's us against white supremacy. It's not us against each other. So it doesn't have to be an attack on the other person. It's really getting that insight so that way we can keep our eyes on the main purpose.
Guys, I don't want to dominate this conversation. And
as you entered in this space of talking about race at major companies, what type of pushback do you get from employees, right? Because it seems like you're a facilitator, but we're all human beings. How do you deal with the person in the conversation who is the protagonist of the racist behavior, or who tries to gather others? See, this isn't that racist. That person who's trying to separate. I guess that's the best way to put it. The other person who's causing the problem. How do you devoid yourself from the racist person that you're dealing with and the corporation? Because that'd be hard for me. Because I'm gonna say you're fucking racist. You obviously can't tell that person that. How do you find yourself able to deal with that, or knowing that they're being condescending because they think that they're superior because they're white, or they think that whatever the case may be?
Right. So I think a couple of things. One, before I do any workshop with a group, I set ground rules for what that's going to mean. And one of the things that I say is that when we speak with the intent of of being understood. And when we listen with the intent of understanding, meaning that if you're saying something and I'm not getting it, then it's on you to say it in a different way to help me to understand it, because you want to speak with the intent of me truly understanding you. And if I'm listening to you, I'm going to sit with the intent of truly understanding where you're coming from. Because if we're not understanding each other, then you can see again how this sort of sideways conversation is going to happen, and we're really not going to move forward. The second thing that's important for me is that I don't care if you're racist. What I care about is your behavior, because your racism is your issue. That's a character trait that you need to work out between you and Jesus. What we need to talk about is your behavior and how that is showing up and impacting the people in the spaces that you're in, and how you're using that power to cause harm. And so whether you agree with me about you being racist is irrelevant, because then that gets into debates that I don't have the power to convince you something you don't want to be. But I can say to you, Walter, whenever you come into a space and you wipe down everything that you believe your Black employee touched, you can see how that causes a problem. So let's talk about your reasoning behind that, and let's talk about other ways you can go about engaging in this space with the people who don't look like you. And so when you kind of, get at it from that perspective, then we can have some tangibles that we can use as markers to bring about behavioral change. Whether you continue to hate the Black people you work with, again, is irrelevant to me. Are you causing harm to them by your behavior and what you're doing in that space? If the answer is no, then again, I wish you well with that hate, because it's not going to take you very far. But if it is causing harm, then we need to talk about what you're doing here, and how we as a community are going to make room for or not make room for that behavior in that space. And one of the things I find isn't that most people are pretty receptive and open to engaging in these conversations. Again, I really put a lot of time into framing this space and making it a good space. And so thankfully, the response I typically get is, this is the first time I had a conversation about race and I didn't hate it. I actually felt like I want to keep talking about this stuff, and I didn't want to shy away from it. All those things are really good. What I think a good signs that this is a healthy conversation, and it's being done well. But one of the pushbacks I've heard has been things like, it's not a race, it's class. It's not this issue, it's that issue. So kind of turning it over to something else.
That angers me, Doc. Oh my gosh, I'm like, oh. Go ahead,
right?
You said it, and my blood just, go ahead.
Right, so kind of get turned away from race, it's about something else. Or you get it again, the defensive about, I am not a racist. Here's all the things that I do, and people, and how do I convince people that I'm not racist? How do I do that? The other thing is people feeling that this is unnecessary. I don't hate anybody in my heart. And if we just treat people like people, everything will be fine. And so that's another sort of sentiment. And I get that from people who are of color as well, not just white people who don't think that there's a need for it. Everything will be better if you just treat people as they come to your life. Just treat people well, be kind, be respectful, and everything will be fine. But when we do that, we minimize racism to think that it's merely an interpersonal issue and not a systemic issue, right? So if you and I are playing chess together and it's rigged in my favor, it doesn't matter how polite I am to you, it's still a rigged game, right? And if I get up and I leave and Mia takes my place, it's still a rigged game. Mia is still going to be ahead of you in that game. So it's not just about how am I interacting with you personally, it's also the systems that have been created to accommodate an advantage of one group over the other.
I have a word for Black people who don't recognize that, and it gets me banned on social media.
So it's those sorts of things. It's really helping people understand that, because again, for so long, and I think sort of an unfortunate byproduct of the civil rights movement sort of conversation has been that people made racism just merely, you hate me, I hate you, and that's the problem. So if you sick dogs on me, if you hit me with water hoses, then you're bad. If you don't do that, then you're good. And it kind of misses that silent systemic piece that keeps everything in its place. So as long as you think you're a good person, you're not racist. And the idea of being racist means that you're a bad person, and bad people need to be shunned, and I don't want to be shunned. So you get defensive and worried about what it means for you and your future if people think you're a bad person. Do you see what I mean? And that all of that is completely sideways, has nothing to do with the fact that there's inequity built into our system and it's causing harm to everyone who lives in it.
Sure.
Sounds like the basis for critical race theory. That's what it
Well, I mean,
sounds like.
my mom worked in the Marshal Service for a long time, and one of the tests that she helped get implemented was cognitive association of criminals, right? So all Department of Justice agents who carry a gun take an association test, flash a picture, and they click good, bad, good, bad, good, bad, good, bad, 15 minutes. Every single person, Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, no matter what the officer was, over 60% of them associated negative with the Black person's image when they saw it on the screen across all races. And that's pretty interesting. So that shows you that inherent racism that you were just describing is something that it's programmed into our society over 400 years of all the crap coming into now. And while you may think that you're an equitable person, it doesn't matter. We have these things that are in us, they just are, you know.
Absolutely. And what you're highlighting is implicit bias, right? And that it exists there. And also the fact that, you know, I believe that racism is this sort of poisonous gas that we all inhale. We're all sort of breathing in, right? So we're all impacted. We're all impacted by it in different ways and to different degrees, but we're all impacted by it. Therefore, sort of like the motto of my company is that we're all impacted by, we're all affected by racism. Therefore, it's on all of us to sort of help eradicate it. We all have a role to play. No one gets to sit out. So even in conversations where it's like, you know, white people be quiet and don't say anything, like, no, I need you to be here, be involved in this conversation because you have a role to play. And I'm doing it. And frankly, it was made for your benefit. So you have even more responsibility than I do to help them do it, right? So there's this sort of, in my belief anyway, this collaborative need to help make true change that's going to come. And part of that, again, is going to be the personal work of you looking and seeing, wait a second, that's a bias that I'm holding. Whenever that Black person comes to me, I'm always suspicious that they are the criminal or they are the poor person and not this white person who's coming in after them, right? So just even catching yourself doing those things are ways that you can help push back on that internalized racism or help push back on just that racism period, as well as attacking the systemic pieces. It's not an either or, it's an and that's necessary. And I think, again, so many times people get caught up on either side of it. Like two things can be true at the same time, right? You can be a racist person and the system can be racialized and inequitable. And you can be a good person who believes in treating people well and still operate in a racialized system that harms a lot of people around you. And there are several ways in which that message gets sent, right? If you think about movies, right? Who's typically the bad guy in the movie, or even if it's a cartoon, if you listen to the voice of the character, it often has like more of like a Black dialect than a person who isn't. The Lion King was a fantastic movie, but Scar and all of the hyenas, they were darker than Simba and the other ones. Like there's a message in everything, right? So we see it all the time. When we talk about purity is white and evil is Black.
Like devil food cake. Absolutely.
You know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Doc, where does the therapy piece come in?
So therapy piece comes in with me talking, you know, if people have issues around anxiety, depression, any of those things, you know, we can work on that. Because of the way that I think about, again, nothing and no one lives in a vacuum, we integrate the piece of how does your racial identity play a role in your experiences. So if you are, let's say, having a hard time connecting at work, and part of it is your anxiety about your performance, right? We'll talk about what's getting in the way of it, but because of my lens, I'll also say, how does you being a Black man, do you think influence some of that anxiety that you're feeling when you go into the office, right? Is it possible that the stereotypes and the negative beliefs about Black intelligence and Black ability may be shaping some of this feeling that you need to prove yourself, right? That maybe people are questioning your ability to do your job, that gets heightened, not because they actually are, but because you fear that they might be, right? How is that maybe contributing to some of the anxiety that you're feeling? So I'm pulling in my awareness of this racial dynamic and the racial trauma that's real and that exists into the work. So again, we're able to help people to see themselves as holistic beings, and also being able to kind of put some of what they're experiencing into context, that you're not making it up. Like, that is a legitimate concern. Like, people are going to think about your intelligence and question it a little bit more than they would someone who didn't look like you. That's not a made up story. So how can we hold that truth, but also help you to find the power in the middle of that truth and not be consumed by that, and have that be the only narrative that's true, the only thing that is having a role in how you're showing up in your workspaces. So it's being able to help people to make those connections and those dots, as well as giving them, helping them to discover what are some healthy tools they can use to just survive in a racialized society, because that's what we have to do. We have to survive in it, and hopefully we can thrive as we work to dismantle some of it.
Anybody else before we get the doc to plug everything that she's doing?
I could ask 1,000 questions, but we're not.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's why I'm holding back. You guys take the workshop.
Because what would happen if all those things were undone, right? What happens if they're all undone? You know, is it only good that can come out of it? Or is there going to be a whiplash of society where it turns 180 degrees and goes the other way?
What does the other way mean?
Are you on a Terry Tate black supremacist thing, sir?
I'm just saying that is there a possibility? Is that in the realm of possibility that in changing or in subverting the white supremacy that's going on now, and it has to be replaced with something. It's not going to be. It can't be replaced with equity, right? Because we're not in a position numerically to displant it 100%, to displant it. So it would have to be an aggressive motion, right? So is the pulling it away, the supremacy part, is that going to cause friction down the road because no one wants to give up their power? So when you take it away, what happens to society then?
So I disagree. I don't think it has to go the other way, because I don't even think that's possible. Secondly, I think it implies that when you say we don't have the numbers, it implies that only Black people would be in this fight, when that's not the truth, right? We have tons of people of all different races who agree that racism and white supremacy is bad. So we actually have the numbers, right, that could help change the tide on this. You're absolutely right that power concedes nothing, and people are not just going to willingly give up power that's in their favor. However, I do think that when we talk about changing the system and replacing it, if we're operating in the mindset of I win, you lose, then yes, we have no other choice but to recreate white supremacy in another form, maybe with people of different skin colors at the top of the hue. But if we're thinking about it as we want to create a society where people are valued because they are people, and we're going to do our best to recognize, just like we would with implicit biases, when we're screwing it up, and be willing and humble enough to change and to challenge those thoughts. And we are always on the path of correcting it. I think because we're humans and we're flawed, we're never going to get to a place where things are perfect. It's just not possible. But can we get closer with each step? Then yeah, if we're willing and committed to doing that. And that's going to require both a humility on the part of the people with the power to concede some of it, also a pushing on the people on the other side to say this is not an okay system, we need to push for change and to help correct it. But then there's also going to be a commitment from everyone involved to say this is the vision that we're wanting to have for society, and none of that's easy, right? None of that is easy. I don't know if we'll ever necessarily reach there, but I'm certainly willing to do my part to help us get closer to it.
Are you seeing in your work a shift with younger generations where it does seem that there seems to be more of a transition where there is more equity, there is more equality across the board in terms of acceptance for people of different nationalities, different backgrounds, where there is less racism, more acceptance just of people, whether they're LGBTQ or, Black, white, Hispanic? Are you starting to see that within the workplace, or does it seem like it's still pretty much the same systems of oppression that we've seen probably from our parents' generation and our grandparents' generation.
Yeah, I think there's more language, right? People have more language than they perhaps had before. I think there's more of a willingness to name things and to talk about them. Whether there's a shift in the degree of racism that exists, I don't know. And the reason I say that is because I think there is sort of what feels to me like an old wives' tale that will just sort of age it out, that as generations go on, we'll get better and better at being good to each other. But the people who are raising the generation to come are imparting those same values. So those values don't really go away. And I kind of believe that white supremacy never really loses, it just changes the rules of the game. So if you say, okay, you fine, sit at the back of the bus. Okay, I won't tell you can't sit at the back of the bus anymore. I'll just stop all the buses from coming to your neighborhood. Done. It just like changes how it morphs. So I don't necessarily know if it's gone down. I just think it's maybe shifted the way that it's being presented. And because we have yet to undo the system that keeps it in its place, it's going to be where it's going to be. And so I think that there needs to be, which is why, again, I push so hard against getting into those fights about whether or not people are racist or whether or not are convincing people of anything. I really think it's important to see the system, because once the system is intact, it does not really matter so much how people are thinking or feeling about it if nothing is really changing how we're operating as a society. And because we love to categorize and make sense of the world and put people in groups and into boxes, we're always going to find something to divide us, right? There's a great video that I like with John Mellencamp. He has a song he released years ago called Walk Tall. And in the video, people of all colors are like bonded and living together happily, but they are hateful of anybody who's short. And so like this girl in the video falls in love with a guy who's like 4 feet tall. And like there's this whole anarchy to like get him out of town because of their love and how inappropriate it is, right? And so the video kind of makes fun of how silly racism really is. It's just as dumb as disliking someone for being short. But because that's how we're wired to categorize and to have in and outsiders, we kind of do this. So to your point, Walter, we probably would just find something else to separate ourselves over if race is kind of made a moot point. However,
we could do it though.
I'm sorry?
We could get rid of racism in one
We
generation.
could, and we could very well replace it with heightism. Like we could replace it with hair. We can do so many other things to have it become an issue, because we're constantly trying to assign value to people or take away value from people. And that's where I kind of come back to. Racism is about saying, you as a person of who's white, you have more value in society than a person who is not. And therefore, we will do whatever we can to take care of you. Other people have less value and therefore we will not. And so it's that inequity of value distribution that I'm really coming against. Being white isn't wrong, just like being Black isn't wrong. It's not about your skin color. That's how we were made, that it is what it is. It's the inequity of value that we're assigning to that white skin and to that Black skin that makes it a problem. So if we get at how are we assigning value and what are our value systems, then I think we have a better shot of really undoing it.
John Cougar Mellencamp. That's hilarious. Doc, what can you plug what it is that you're doing, because it's so important, it's so valuable. It needs to be out there. So we thank you for coming on the pod. Sean, did you have anything? I'm not trying to cut you off.
No, I'm just blown, man. I'm sorry.
Hey man, it happens. Yeah, Doc, plug away, please. It's going to be in the write-up also.
No worries. Well, thank you so much for having me on. It's been fun just listening to you guys go back and forth. The Mia and Walter conversation was hilarious. So thank you.
I aim to please. I try to pull the meat out of it. These are things that people actually think. So I try to make it fun.
We're tackling the real issues on the brothers and sisters.
I feel like if she could slap you through the screen, she would.
That would just be more squats, though. That would just be more squats. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that.
It's transactional.
Exactly.
It's transactional.
There it is.
But one of the things I can say is that through my company, Race Positive, I provide a lot of interactive workshops that are centered around helping people to have conversations around race. And the goal is to equip them so that they can feel empowered to navigate and initiate these conversations in a manner that actually gets us somewhere moving forward. So by coming to the workshop, whether we're going to learn about microaggressions or we're going to learn about systemic racism or implicit bias, how those things show up in your world, in your life, and what you can do about it. So they're all interactive. They're all meant to help you take the skill or to take the information and use it in a very practical way. My brain's very practical. So it's all about like, how do you actually apply this rather than just understand the idea behind it. So if they go to my website, www.dranika.com, and you spell out doctor, DOCTOR, you'll get it and you'll see a whole write-up of the different workshops and services that they offer. They're all unique to the space, so no two presentations are identical. So I will meet with whoever that educator or leader of the company is, and we'll talk about what your needs are, and then we'll make a presentation that fits your needs. They're about roughly 90 minutes to 120 minutes. And again, it's conversational, and the whole time we're just going back and forth and doing fun activities to help really grasp what I think are important concepts to grasp. So that's one of the things that they can do. Again, as you mentioned, I offer therapeutic support. So that's something that people can also connect with me on if they're looking for therapy. I will be considered an out-of-network provider, so I'm not in network with any insurance companies, but I would be happy to provide you this for bills, and you can submit it to the companies that you want for reimbursement. But I'm happy to talk to anybody about their needs, and if we're a good fit, then that's great. If we're not, I'm happy to also recommend you to other spaces that can help you to get the support that you need, because that's really what I'm interested in, is you getting the help that you need and that you want. So those are some of the big things that are on my plate right now.
I said 2 hours when we started. Walter said 3 hours. It's 2 hours and 55 minutes. We went off the rails with Del and Sonia. It killed us. It absolutely killed us. It was a great conversation, but it killed us. At some point, we got to get this thing under wraps. But no, what a great conversation. No, what a great pod. Dr. Anika Kamala Malzak, thank you so much for joining the brothers and sisters this evening, I should say. DrAnika.com, Race Positive LLC, if you need it. And we probably all do to some regard, black or white, talk to her. As you can see from what she shared with us today on this pod, very even keeled, very center of the fairway, very 275, 300 off the tee. It's solid. Thank you.
My pleasure. Okay, thanks for having me.
No problem. And that's all I meant to say this in format of the pod. We should preview what we're going to do next week. We'll have Dr. Bamidele Olatabuson on next week to talk about a myriad of things.